All right, we have the great Tristan Harris. Woo! Give it up. Yeah, we're ready. We're ready for Tristan. Tristan is the co-founder and president of the Center for Humane Technology. Yes, right? He is the co-host of the podcast, Your Undivided Attention. He is the primary subject of the Netflix documentary, which has been shown worldwide zillions of times now, The Social Dilemma. If you haven't seen it, you must see it, right? And he was recently named to Time Magazine's 100 Next Leaders Shaping the Future, and to Rolling Stone Magazine's 25 People Shaping the World. And he also happens to be a genuinely authentic, fabulous human being. So let's give it up for Tristan. He will be doing a talk called, well, we don't have a title. He will be doing a talk, and then Soren will be coming on afterwards to do a Q&A with him afterwards. So let's just bring him on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's really great to be here. I haven't done these kinds of, it's probably like you haven't been in a space like this. It feels weird and new to me because I haven't done this in such a long time. But I don't know how many of you know this. Our work at the Center for Humane Technology and a lot of the stuff that's in the Social Dilemma, it was actually really born out of this Wisdom 2.0 community. I met Soren and some people here in 2013. You know, many people here are friends. I'm sure I can't see you in the audience, but we've been trying to raise awareness about these issues for a very long time. And I'm sure that many of you, how many people here have seen The Social Dilemma? Okay, that's actually many more than I thought. Okay, that's great. And people are very aware now, hopefully, of the issues of addiction, misinformation, polarization, teen mental health. This comma-delimited list I just gave you, I remember when we were kind of coming up with that list, and it was a new list at the time. What I wanted to do today was to talk about where this is going, because the challenge is that technology keeps moving faster than our ability to put our hand on the steering wheel. Every time we put our hand on the steering wheel, it keeps running away. So what I wanted to talk about today is what is the wisdom that we need to steer technology adequately as it keeps moving faster and faster. So we're going to do about 25 minutes, 30 minutes of presentation, then Soren and I will have a conversation, hopefully get some of your questions. And so we often start with this quote by E.O. Wilson that the fundamental problem of humanity is we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So we're chimpanzees with atomic bombs and regulated by medieval institutions. I typically go into the Paleolithic emotions, but this time I want to go into the godlike technology. So there's a recent new technology called clip-guided image diffusion. This is actually literally something that didn't exist about 3 to 4 months ago. You can give it text like, a girl stood in the blossoming Sunset Valley, the pondering the mountains in the distance, peaceful pastel palette matte painting. And out of scratch, it generates this. So the reason I'm giving you this is that we talk about the problems of misinformation and Facebook and what are we going to do, how are we going to regulate to save our democracy. Care a lot about all those issues, but what I want to show you are examples of where this is going, how fast it's going. Here's another example. This coffee has been laced with LSD. This is what the computer produced. Google Soup. Can you see the creativity in this, right? This is not just a clip art image or finding an existing image in the internet. It is inventing brand new images. Here's a Mozilla Firefox tarot card and a Google Chrome tarot card. If you look at the detail, right? Now, let me go more dark. The kind of drawing that the school calls you about, and it's like, is everything okay at home? Jimmy has been drawing violent pictures, and it has everyone worried. And it generates this. And if you notice, there's even Jimmy scrawled in the corner. So I want to give you a sense of where this is going, and we obviously find ourselves in very precarious times, the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion. And we're seeing images like this, and like this, and like this, except is this image that I'm showing you right now, is it from the war in Ukraine, or did I ask the computer? Breaking. Massive explosion reported over Kharkiv, Ukraine, and it generated each of these images. And you put this into the internet, And this is like a neutron bomb for trust on the internet, right? Because even the fact that this exists, the fact that this is possible, means that people will start to doubt the things that they see, even if there's like none of this stuff really floating around the internet right now. So the problem I wanted to talk to you about today is what we call the complexity gap. So the complexity of the world is actually increasing, right? It's on this exponential curve. And our ability to respond, our ability to make sense of it, and to respond to the world and make good choices adequate to that complexity is not matching that curve. So if you were to map it out, and you had a graph, you had the complexity of the issues, you've got misinformation, cyber attacks, global financial risk, extremism, planetary boundaries, new synthetic biology. Now, this might sound like just a list of boogeymen, like just different things that we should be concerned about. But they're actually interrelated. Like, think about Russia and the invasion of Ukraine. Up until that invasion, you might have thought that global financial risk and nuclear escalation, misinformation, and cyber attacks were separate issues. But now you start to see that when you start pushing pressure on Russia from the kind of virality machines of social media, where you can kind of hashtag cancel Putin, and the whole world wants to cancel a single individual and then constrain him, and then suddenly you have real risk with nuclear escalation, right? So the risks are all interconnected. Now, our ability to respond to them depends on our ability to make sense of that complexity. What is the wise way to respond to that situation? I won't go into it, but there's new scary stuff in AI around synthetic biology, and I probably shouldn't give some of these examples because they're information hazards. The challenge is that technology is increasing the steepness of that line, of the runaway technology, right? And it's also simultaneously decreasing our ability to make sense of that complexity. If you think about the social dilemma problem statement, the addiction, outrage, polarization, distractibility, it means that that second line, we're not matching up to it. So the talk today is about how can we really meet this meta challenge of our time. And I want to say that the key to closing the complexity gap is actually wisdom. And so that's what I want to talk to you about and convince you of today. So today I want to argue that our previous wisdom and thinking, even a lot of the moral and philosophical concepts that we hold dear, freedom of expression, free speech, privacy, the meaning of these philosophical concepts is being undermined faster than we're updating what those concepts are about. So if you say protect freedom of speech, we need to protect freedom of speech, but then what happens if I can flood the internet with these things, right? A lot of people talk about propaganda, Russian propaganda, Ukrainian propaganda. My friend Renee DiResta talks about amplifaganda. Amplifaganda is when I take things that your own citizens say. So if I'm Russia and I want to manipulate the US, I'm not planting propaganda. I wait for your citizens to say, you know, California should secede from the United States. And when one of your citizens says that, I just turn the dial up. I amplify, amplifaganda, that person. So this is a whole different type of information warfare, but our concepts and our regulation and how our culture responds has to be adequate to the way that this is moving. We have this notion we have to protect people's privacy. But if we don't think about this at the level of, well, what does that really mean in the age that we're moving to? You know, the first way you solve it is you put pop-ups on the internet and everyone just clicks accept, 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 accept. It doesn't really do the thing we're talking about. Plus, in the new world of AI, this is a paper from 2 or 3 years ago, you can predict people's big 5 personality traits, their openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, with just how people move their mouse around on a screen with about 70% accuracy. So Cambridge Analytica was about people being able to steal your personality traits if they had access to your data. But by the way, I'm just giving you a sample. It's not that Facebook is doing this right now. This is an academic paper. But I want you to just be aware of the capacities that are moving, right? There's another example where AI is now better than humans at reading our micro-expressions. So you can actually read people's micro-expressions better than a human can. You can point AI at someone's face and the skin color to my eye. I will not be able to see the blood pulsing through your face, right? But it turns out a computer, if you point it at someone's face, they can see the slight discoloration for every micropulse of blood, which means you can actually get personalized information about how stressed they are. So technology keeps moving faster. You probably wanted me to talk about how we're going to solve the social dilemma. I want to talk about that. But we are now moving to the metaverse. We're moving to these other exponential technologies. So you can't have the power of gods without the love, prudence, and wisdom of gods. This is a quote by my friend Daniel Schmachtenberger. I highly recommend people check out the podcast episode that we did called "A Problem Well Stated is a Problem Half Solved." This is going to become very relevant. So what does it mean to have this wisdom? Well, the second aspect of that problem statement I mentioned at the beginning is technology is simultaneously undermining our capacity for wisdom. So what do we mean by this? So here's that graphic again. Let's zoom into this other part, the decreasing our ability to make sense of the complexity. So let's zoom into that for a moment. So a lot of people are aware of, this is the graph we showed in the social dilemma. While we were all looking out for the moment when technology would overwhelm human strengths, that's when it takes our jobs, that's when it's smarter than us, right? We miss this much earlier point on the timeline when technology undermines human weaknesses. And our argument is that this is the kind of thing that went wrong in our design of technology. So if we zoom into that for a second, what do I mean by undermine human weakness? Well, much like wisdom traditions and spirituality are about really pointing the mirror back at ourselves, like understanding ourselves honestly, just doing a full appraisal of how do we really work. Well, if you do that, you see that human beings have these things called cognitive limits. Our brain can hold 7 plus or minus 2 things in short-term memory. And when you overwhelm cognitive limits, you feel that as a problem called information overload, right? And when we have this dopamine reward system that you heard earlier today with Anna Lemke from Stanford, who's also in the social dilemma. And she shows, obviously, you hack the dopamine system, you're going to get addictive use. And when you hack social validation, you get influencer culture. So everyone has to be an influencer. Everyone's checking to see how much influence they have, how attractive they are. When you hack confirmation bias, we feel that as a problem called fake news. It's not really fake news. It's just mass confirmation bias. It's just seeing more stuff that's the sugar on top of the foundations of what I already believe in the world. And outrage, polarization, and trust, that when you hack our trust, we get bots and deepfakes. So the purpose of this is not to create this overwhelm. It's to create a unified model for how we can see that this is going wrong. Because once you see that this is actually about hacking human vulnerabilities, we can see that these problems are connected. And I would call these anti-wisdom. This is greed, aversion, delusion, fear, jealousy. And if you put these things together in a system, they're like an interconnected system. We used to call this human downgrading, or the climate change of culture. These problems kind of reinforce each other. And if you place these problems, this is the thing that's decreasing our ability to make sense of the complexity. So I wanted just to make this really clear about kind of how we got where we are and where we are, because wisdom is the thing that we need to help address this problem. And part of it is this slide is really a tool, hopefully, for those who are trying to solve these problems, that our goal statement shouldn't be, how do we take a whack-a-mole stick and hire 10,000 content moderators in one language instead of 100 countries that Facebook's in, and remove 10% of the misinformation or something like that. That's not adequate to closing the wisdom gap. So I wanted to frame this because this is the kind of meta problem that we face. So let's take an example of another one way that we're thinking about it. So if we say, well, fact-checking, here's a paradigm of solution. Will fact-checking be enough to address misinformation? Okay. Well, in the new versions of technology, how many people here know what GPT-3 is? Okay, I've got only like 15 hands or so up. GPT-3 is the text version of that image thing I showed you at the beginning. So I can tell GPT-3, I want you to write me a 20-page research paper on why mRNA vaccines are not safe, citing real facts and real statistics of real people who did indeed die. And include writing about the vested corporate interests of academics who said that it was safe. And it will be able to generate that kind of text, right? Now, by the way, when I say this, I'm not actually for or against the vaccine. I'm giving you an example. I could give it the opposite example. So just so before, if you get upset, we're in this polarized environment, and part of what we need wisdom for is to not get triggered by these conversations. Masks, vaccines. Social media has been a fault line finder that just magnified the contrast, all the little divisive fault lines in society, and just surfaced those. But I wanted to give you an example because fact-checking isn't an adequate paradigm when this is the kind of thing that I can put on the internet. I can use real facts and string them together in misleading ways. So that's kind of the new problem statement has to be, how do we make sense of the world in deep, thoughtful ways? Instead of saying is something true or false, we can ask, is it true, truthful, and representative of the truth. A lot of the ways that propaganda is used right now is by misrepresenting partial truths and pretending that they're representative of vast swaths of reality. Okay, so here's another example. Social media creates perception gaps. How many people here know what perception gaps are? Okay, a couple. So perception gaps come from this great organization called More in Common. And they measure, you can't measure, for example, if I say how many people are racist in the United States, it's like a very hard thing to measure. What's the truth value of that, right? But what I can measure is I can ask Republicans and I can ask Democrats, do you consider racism still a problem in the US today? And they did this. They asked Democrats, do you think racism is a problem? Republicans, do you think racism is a problem? Perception gaps are what's the gap between what Democrats think, for example, Republicans who consider racism a problem, versus how many Republicans actually consider it a problem. So if you ask Democrats, for example, what percentage of Republicans still consider racism a problem, I think they say that it's only 25% of Republicans. But the actual answer is about 70% would agree with the statement that racism is still a problem. And you can measure, when they measure the gap between 70% and 25%, that's what they call a perception gap. Because you can measure that objectively. How good are you at estimating what the other side believes? And if you ask Republicans, what percentage of Democrats are LGBTQ? They estimate that 36% of Democrats are LGBTQ, but actually 6% of Democrats are LGBTQ. So, and what they've showed is that basically we get hit by this weird funhouse mirror, this kind of double whammy of the extreme views in the world. So first of all, a very small percentage of the US and the world use Twitter, for example, but the ones who use it tend to be the most active voices. And the extreme voices both participate more often. So they say things more often in a day, right? Versus a thoughtful person who's sort of trying to figure things out. You're not posting very much. That's the first part of the double whammy. The second one is when you say something extreme, it goes more viral. Versus the moderate person, they're not saying extreme things. So imagine we're getting hit by this funhouse mirror of massively overrepresenting the extreme views in our society. And what this group More in Common found is that the more you use social media, the longer you use it, the worse you are at estimating the other side's beliefs. So you think it's the other way around. The more time I spend in social media and news feeds, I should be better at understanding the world and what other people are thinking. But in fact, it's the other way around. So let me just go through here. And we start to believe that these extreme voices and these stereotypes of the other side are actually representative of who they are. We're all running malware, right? And even though I'm telling you this, even though you just heard me say all this, notice that did your beliefs about whatever the other side is, did it change in that moment? Didn't change. We live in this kind of funhouse mirror where we're constantly confused about, we're getting in fights with phantoms, basically, a kind of a stereotype. And there's actually a name for this in psychology. It's called being cognitively impenetrable, that even though you know something is true, you can't get your mind to not feel and think and relate to the world the way that you're automatically relating. So here's an example. The A and the B, if you look at the color of those squares, I'm sure many of you have seen this psychology experiment, they look like different colors, yes? Everybody, yes, okay. Now I want you to watch carefully. I'm gonna put these two lines here. I didn't change the colors. They're actually the same color. The shadow causes your brain to actually project that they believe that they're different colors, right? But I know you don't believe me because I can show it to you again. I'll just do it again. So they're different colors. When I put it together, they look, you can tell it's the exact same color. Now, let me take it away. Your brain goes right back to seeing it as different colors. So you're cognitively impenetrable. Now, the thing is, we have the gift as a species of being intelligent enough that we can point the telescope of our own intelligence back at our own mind, and we can actually discover a fact like that. Lions can't do that. Gazelles can't do that. Chimpanzees can't do that. We have a unique capacity. Homo sapiens sapiens, the species that it knows, is able to interrogate its own capacity. And I think that the foundations of spirituality and wisdom, all the things that are discussed here, are based on this self-understanding, this deeper self-understanding. And as I said, this is called being cognitively impenetrable, that you're still biased even though if you know how the magic trick works. If I tell you don't think of an elephant, it's pretty hard. So we're trapped in that funhouse mirror, but that leads us to this fundamental question about who we are. I love Byron Katie's work, and I'm sure many of you are aware of her work. And her work is so powerful because she asks you the question, who would you be without that thought? Not what would you feel if you didn't think that thing, or how, what would be different. She asks you an identity level question. Who would you be without that thought? Now, one of my concerns is that we are confused, because if you look in social media and believe that it is a mirror for society, then you think that we're just this addicted, outraged, polarized, narcissistic, misinformed society. And you might be convinced that that is who we are, right? Oh, just let's be pessimistic about human nature. We're petty, we're narcissistic, we're paranoid, we're addicted. And if we believe that's who we are, then I wouldn't be working on this. I wouldn't think that there's a different thing that can be done. I think many people are in this room because we know that who we can be is different than what we see in the social media mirror, right? And so what I'd like to ask is, who would we be without these perverse incentives of social media? And it's from this identity level question that I think you can arrive at hope about how we can have a different future, but it's by this deeper self-understanding. So wisdom means knowing our limits. Well, we just kind of, to end cap that chapter of this presentation, that was about knowing our own limits about how we work. Wisdom also means seeing in systems, thinking in systems. How are the systems working, the gears wrenching? How are the feedback loops in a system? And we always go to the work of an amazing thinker named Donella Meadows, who wrote a great book called Thinking in Systems, when she studies how systems work and how systems operate. How do you intervene and change a system? She wrote a great essay called 12 Leverage Points for Intervening in a System. When we think about that essay, when we think about how do you intervene in social media. So going through the 12 leverage points, the deepest one is this power to transcend the paradigm from which the problems were arising. So what do I mean by that? What's the paradigm of thinking that got us here? So beyond maximizing eyeballs and engagement, which we all know is the problem. I just want to acknowledge the business model is the problem. We all know that. But beyond that, there's a paradigm of thinking that got us here. So in Silicon Valley, we're at the Computer History Museum. And if you're working at one of the major tech companies, I wanted to give you a list of common beliefs held in the tech industry. We give users what they want. Every tech has goods and bads. We've always had moral panics about television, radio, video games. Elvis was shaking his hips. We need to maximize personalized content. Technology is neutral. Who's to choose? Who are we to choose what's good for people or what's true? We have to grow at all costs, and we obsess over metrics, measure, 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 and we capture attention. And when I say these beliefs, I'm not actually trying to blame or accuse. I think this is a pretty honest assessment of how people in Silicon Valley, if you're operating there, this is how you think about designing technology. Now, the reason I'm pointing to this is if you stuff this into a brain of a designer, then it shouldn't be surprising that you see these problems of information overload, addictive use, narcissism, fake news, polarization. If you're giving people what they want, we've always had moral panics, come on, growth at all costs, who are we to choose? Right? It's a direct fallout. It's the digital fallout of the mindset that got us here. And everybody knows this quote by Einstein, no problem can be solved with the same level of thinking that created it. So what will it take to upgrade our paradigm? Well, Donella Meadows wrote in her book, you keep pointing at the anomalies and failures in the old paradigm, and you keep coming yourself loudly and with assurance from the new one. And you insert people with the new paradigm into places of public visibility and power. So it's a great quote, right? She's a wonderful, wonderful thinker. So if we give it an example, here's some of the old beliefs of the paradigm I just showed you. So what would be the replacement beliefs? So instead of giving users what they want, what if we saw in terms of human vulnerabilities? That human minds are limited, biased, vulnerable, blind spot. We have confirmation bias. We can design for confirmation bias. We can design around that once we know that that's a thing. It's said that one of the reasons phone numbers can be 7 digits long because we want you to remember them. And credit card numbers are 16 digits because we don't want you to remember them. And these are based on very simple insights about how human minds work. And when you design for how human minds work, we can design to respect human vulnerability. That's the deepest definition, the foundation of our work in being humane. Instead of saying every tech has goods and bads, we have to start acknowledging when there's externalities or bads that are irreversible. Like when you start putting people down these rabbit holes that are really hard to pull people back from because of confirmation bias. We need to have a tech that's actively minimizing externalities and incentives to do that. Instead of maximizing personalization, we can try to design for creating shared understanding. And there's ways of doing that, by the way. Maybe I can go into that later in the Q&A. Instead of saying technology is neutral, we can actively support fairness and justice. There's many marginalized people who get harassed or don't have the kind of support because the platforms don't want to invest in Myanmar or Ethiopia, where sometimes they get the worst of some of these systems, the polarization machine. And instead of saying, who are we to choose, we have to consciously center values. You are choosing when you're making decisions about how things work. And instead of obsessing over metrics, you can help people thrive. And I'm giving these examples because these little icons, this is all part of, I'm not selling anything here, but this is part of a course called Foundations of Humane Technology. It's just a free course. We are giving this away. We have some generous donors who are funding us so that we can offer that. All we're trying to do is create a shared understanding, a shared new baseline of understanding, so that we can try to attack these problems at their root, as opposed to trying to hire more content moderators or put a limit that's not going to fully address the core issue. And so this is free for everyone. For those of you who work in technology or know people in technology, we have people at Apple, at Snapchat, TikTok, all these major companies are taking it, universities, the UN. So welcome to check it out. And our goal is to have about 100,000 humane technologists who are trained in just a different paradigm, different way to think about these problems. And one of the things that's really challenging about this is that people have a hard time addressing these problems and bringing it up in conversations at the companies that they work with, right? And so one of the best aspects of it is actually putting people into community where they can talk to other people who are asking the same question, which is one of the most important things. When I was at Google and I was trying to ask these questions, I was alone. It's like, how do you bring these conversations up? You're going directly against some of the business models that are not really at Google, but at some of the other companies. How do you talk about this? So I think the community is a really important aspect. And hopefully, if you're running that in your head when you're designing technology, creating shared understanding, respecting human vulnerabilities, you can get a different result. Instead of rewarding narcissism and influencers, we can reward modeling wisdom or nuanced thinking. So just to summarize, wisdom means knowing our limits. It means pointing the telescope of our minds back at ourselves and understanding more about how we really work. If we understand that, we can bump the line up a little bit. Wisdom means seeing beyond black and white. There's a great quote by John Perry Barlow. I think it's never assume that someone else doesn't hold. What is it? I'm just going to botch this quote. It's like never assume that someone's beliefs aren't as noble to them as yours are to you. And try to really understand why people value some of the things that they value. And if we do that, we can bring out the wisdom gap. Wisdom also means confronting self-deception. Byron Katie's work, asking fundamental, deep questions, who would you be without that thought? This is processes of really being in inquiry with ourselves. And if you do that, it helps close the wisdom gap. And wisdom also means knowing when we don't know. I have not shared a lot of information or recommendations about what people should do with COVID because I just know that I'm not an epidemiologist and I haven't studied it. And if the world actually operated with the principle of only sharing and talking about things that we really knew and we think we could offer, how different might that world be? And wisdom also means seeing in systems and root causes, right? How do we not go after the epiphenomena of the issue? How do we go after the systems and the underlying root causes? And wisdom also means being present with what is, right? And I think the whole point of this conference is examining all sorts of things that wisdom that we need to live in this moment, to be happy, healthy, to thrive in a period of increasing crises, right? This is a very challenging time. And so I was just excited to be able to bring this to this community. And I just wanted to close with one last thought about why to have some hope. I do struggle with hope myself. It's a challenging world out there, right? It's very chaotic and turbulent, and it's likely to get more turbulent. But I just wanted to share a few things about why to have maybe some hope in this space. So when I was at Google back in February 2013, I think it was when I basically had just first came to my first Wisdom 2.0, I released this presentation at Google called A Call to Minimize Distraction and Respect Users' Attention. And it was about the attention economy. It was about the arms race for the race to the bottom of the brainstem, all these things. And if you ask me at Google, I actually stayed at Google for 3 years, and I could not get anything to change for like 3 years. I just kind of felt hopeless, like there really was never going to be a change to any of these systems, even though it seemed like this has to change because it's such a massive problem. But I didn't feel like in my shoes, the felt sense was this is never going to change. And what I want to show you is a timeline of all of these things that have changed. I didn't expect that 60 Minutes would popularize this phrase, race to the bottom of the brainstem. People like Jaron Lanier, who's the inventor of virtual reality, would come out and make a big splash. Shoshana Zuboff from Surveillance Capitalism. Eli Pariser, who wrote the book The Filter Bubble, would be popularizing these concepts. Sophia Nobel would be talking about racist algorithms and the way they already marginalized communities. Guillaume Chaslow, a YouTube recommendations engineer who came out and said, this is how the YouTube system puts people into rabbit holes, that The Verge would say the time well spent debate is over. Time well spent was some of our early work. And we got Facebook to, it was a temporary moment of success, but in 2018, Facebook changed their goal statement to from making the world more open and connected to helping people spend their time well. Companies like Apple and Google have launched these screen time features that started to change. They've launched these focus features. Apple has made a ton of changes in this positive direction. Apple can do so much more. They're one of the best situated actors to change a lot of things we've talked about. Sophie Zhang, a Facebook whistleblower, would come out and talk about all of the harms and create more momentum. And of course, Timnit Gebru at Google would also come out and talk about the ways that AI systems can be biased. And of course, Frances Haugen came out this year. And this, I think, it has had a transformative impact on the space. We have now had, I think, a big tobacco moment in the social media space. This is the big tobacco companies that are testifying before Congress. We have had that moment now around social media. People now, the playbook is now happening on its own. The attorney generals, the key to the big tobacco lawsuits was that the attorney generals opened these investigations on the tobacco companies. They're doing the same thing now on Instagram based on Frances Haugen's reports. The stock price of Facebook has gone down by half since Frances Haugen's disclosures. I would have never believed, if you asked me, that that would ever happen, that it's happened. Their user growth is tapering out. People are saying, but when I use Facebook, I mean kind of the social media engagement attention-sucking machine. So it's more broadly the whole space. People are saying that they want to work at companies that they actually feel purposeful, right? Purpose-aligned. Many people here, they come to Wisdom because they're looking for how do I work in tech and do the purposeful wisdom, self-awareness stuff, right? And I would have never believed if you told me that this topic and that Frances Haugen, a whistleblower, would be honored at the State of the Union, the president's address, which she was about a month ago, and given a standing ovation. And I would have never believed you that a film like The Social Dilemma would reach 100 million viewers in 190 countries in 30 languages. And I would never believe that all these organizations work really hard and in network to try to accelerate change in all these different areas. And now we just need everyone working on closing the complexity gap together. So. So just to quickly say, and we've got about 10 minutes, but if this was the problem statement from E.O. Wilson, maybe one solution is we can embrace our Paleolithic emotions, upgrade our medieval institutions, and hopefully have the wisdom to wield godlike technology. Thank you. And we'll have Soren come out.
Thank you. You got a big brain. First of all, it's great to have you back. Is this your first time in front of a live audience?
I did just one other. I did South by Southwest, which is the first time in front of a live. It's a bit scary. It's like
it is. Well, thank you for that. That was really, really thoughtful. When we were talking about what to do for this session, I got a note for you or someone on your team's like, no, Tristan's got a whole plan for the talk. And so thank you for that. And I love the hopefulness, because I think we really, really need that.
Yeah.
And I have a few questions. I don't know how many. I know there's going to be like 30 people probably lining up. So just so you know, we're not going to get to everybody. But if you have a question, you can line up at the mic and just expect some disappointment, because we're not going to get to everybody. But I'm curious about this wisdom aspect and this ability to see clearly. And I love that you brought in Byron Katie's work, because it feels like there's a way in which the addiction element kind of breaks into a certain identity. And then once we begin to question that identity, who would we be if we didn't do this?
Right.
And I'm curious how you see that happening, because it feels like at first, from knowing you for many years, you're like, if we can get legislation to change, that's a huge key. And so it feels like legislation is still part of the change. But now you're also like, wow, if we can get tech companies to change, that's a real key. Now if we get humans to change. And so do you see it as like a multi-level approach, or is there a particular acupuncture point? Or does the acupuncture point just keep moving?
Yeah, acupuncture point is the right term. This is I just want to name, obviously, these are trillion-dollar companies, a couple of trillion-dollar companies, with more lobbyists often than there are members of Congress, if I want to frame it, right? So and by the way, this isn't an us versus them, these evil corporations, and they all have mustaches that they're twirling while they, it's like, this is not, it's really important to name that. I think the challenge is that they're trapped in a set of incentives, right? Yeah. And what I wish would happen is that Mark Zuckerberg would come out and say, and actually, by the way, Frances, we did an interview for our podcast with Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower. And the reason that she said she came out was because she actually wanted, she released 2,000 pages of Facebook research documents about kind of polarization, teen mental health, like all these different effects, things that people had thought were true, but we didn't have all the evidence, the receipts. I mean, they actually confirmed things that we've been saying for a long time. But when she came out, the reason that she did is she said, I wanted to create an opportunity for Mark to declare moral bankruptcy. Now, the reason for that is not an accusation. It's actually saying in bankruptcy, that term is, it's like a way our society works, where a person can say, I've gotten myself into too much trouble. I am in over my head. And that I need to be valued as a person and not just this huge financial asset thing. And there needs to be some way that we can go from that bankruptcy into, okay, now let's create a solution to collaborate on how we can address this. And she wanted this all out there so that, and this is a big ask. I mean, I don't think she expected necessarily Mark to come out, but to say, I can't do more.
I need help.
I need help. And if he did that, then we could actually get honest about what actually has to happen. Because by the way, a lot of the people who are the most senior staff who are working on trust, integrity, misinformation issues, they're burnt out. And a lot of them have left. And so the brain implant of the Facebook, Twitter machine is still into the society. It's still running our democracy. And the senior technicians had burnt out. One of the problems is the people in kind of audiences like this, who are the conscious ones working in the tech companies, they really try to make change. Like, I know what that's like, and I just am so grateful to those of you who are working on those kinds of things inside of tech companies. I kind of lost my train of thought.
I think well, one of the challenges I can hear from them is, listen, we have to make it super, super compelling and addictive. And if we don't, somebody else will.
Correct.
So let's say we change Facebook, then TikTok comes, and TikTok becomes less than somebody else. So it's like we're set up against a system that rewards that, and I get fired if I don't meet my revenue.
Which is why, to your earlier question about regulation, laws, potential litigation, companies, employees acting differently, a culture that demands different products, demanding, just like we demand organic food, we're demanding yoga and other healthy lifestyle things, as opposed to just letting the race for salt, sugar, fat dominate our food supply. It's the same thing. One of the things that should be clarifying, and we covered this in our podcast episode with Daniel Schmachtenberger, is that we don't actually have these 20 different problems. We have kind of a core set of generator functions. The if I don't do it, the other guy will is true for healthcare. It's true for pharma. It's true for salt, sugar, fat. And it's true for tech. If I don't put the addictive slot machine dynamic where you play and pull again and the other guy does, and I take it out because I want to do the thing that's good for society, but then I notice they keep going deeper into the brainstem, I'm just going to lose that race. And so we have to create a binding for everybody.
Right.
One of the things you and I were talking about backstage is that, obviously you would do this through law. You can imagine that even an Apple App Store or an Apple App Store policy could say, hey, we're not going to allow beautification filters in any of our apps. We know the beautification thing is like really screwing with kids. We can just say, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Because that's an arms race, by the way. There's another example. All of them have Instagram, Snapchat have beautification filters. TikTok went even further down the brainstem into automatically beautifying your image by 2 to 3%.
Wow.
And they did it without asking users' consent, because that's how they would win. Because it's almost like mirror, mirror on the wall.
Yeah.
Which one's going to make me look the prettiest? And you go to the one that makes you look the best.
Right.
And so that's another arms race.
Right.
There has to be something that stops this arms race, that breaks that second line in the chart that I was drawing.
Yeah.
And legislation is important, but I think the challenge is that technology is going to keep evolving faster. Because while we're trying to figure out, well, what would be the right rule for beautification filters, Mark Zuckerberg just invented this entire other universe called the metaverse.
Right.
And there's like 100 more design decisions we got to adjudicate there. So which is why we need the fundamentals to be what is in the best public interest of society. If you're above a certain size, we need your decisions to be based primarily on what would actually make the society stronger.
Right, right. But the company isn't structured like that.
No.
And the board doesn't care about that necessarily.
That's right.
And so we're in a problem where either the community has to demand, like, we're just no longer going to support it if you don't have these values.
Yeah.
Or the structure of businesses somehow, capitalism will have to change somehow. And it sounds like partly your hope is through the course that you and Randy developed, that there'll be education, there'll be more people
thinking at this level with the different paradigms.
And we'll create a new framework from that consciousness, and from that awareness.
Hopefully.
And
that's, I mean, we're all
doing the best we can, I know.
We're all doing the best we can. I mean, we've known since, I think, the early parts of this work, I think in 2016, 2017, it was pretty clear to us that this is capitalism running on, in the same way that you have an infinite growth obligation of, everything has to keep growing forever, running on a finite substrate of the biosphere, the planet. We only have so many forests and rainforests and trees and air. And you have this infinite growth paradigm running on that. In tech, you have an infinite growth paradigm running on the finite substrate of human attention and people.
Right.
And my hope actually was that, as Justin Rosenstein says in the film The Social Dilemma, so long as a whale is worth more dead than alive, and a tree's worth more as 2x4s than as a tree. Yeah. In this model with tech, now we're the whale, we're the tree. But hopefully this is the thing that wakes us up to the problem. Yeah. Because now we can see that because it's personal now.
Right.
Like, I can kind of ignore the Earth for a while and say, well, it's actually pretty beautiful outside here. We're in California.
Nice and warm weather.
Nice and warm weather, even though it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. So it's going to be a little bit scary in a few years. But you had Paul Hawken, I think, earlier.
Paul Hawken,
yeah. But I think the point is that we can use this as a kind of a small laboratory for what the bigger system change that needs to be, because it now makes it clear, right? Yeah. And at least being clear, I think there's a gift. I know this might make people feel uneasy to kind of reckon with the system in this way, right? Like questioning the whole system that we're in. But I think the shared clarity is somehow involved in the convulsions of this system, somehow hopefully delivering us into some different system.
But if I saw my own attention as a limited currency, and I only have so much of it, and I get to be very thoughtful about how I spend that currency, would everything begin to change? I mean, imagine all of us starting to say, like, wow, I only have so many heartbeats left. I only have so much attention. And the apps are not free, per se, if they're ad-based, right? Yeah. We're giving up our attention for a service. And if there was that shift, do you think the people could kind of then determine? Because I think part of what happens is, like, and I get lost too, we get lost within these spheres. Like, oh shit, I just spent 2 hours in this like rabbit hole.
I've been studying this for 9 years nonstop. That's all I've been doing. And do you think that I don't fall into the infinite doom scrolling and then feel horrible about myself because it's like, which is to say, I made this point in the presentation. I don't know if you could see the slide back there, but the cognitive impenetrability, even if I know what it's doing, it still has that effect on me. And the problem is when you take something that is impenetrable in that way, and you make it adjacent, directly adjacent to life needs. So if I have to text someone and I need to text them, and right there next to it in the app switcher was like that infinite scroll Twitter thing I left open, you're going to fall into the trap door. And so we have to. There's ways. I mean, there's a bunch of things I think Apple could do too. By the way, in terms of just they're again this kind of governor of the attention economy, because you could say for things that I want to spend less time on, that's anything that's using that infinite scroll, we could just hide it from the app switcher if it's been there for too long, or something like that. We talked backstage about with Anna Lemke's work. You could actually have some kind of sampling of how much of that dopamine reward circuit, like how much is it really triggering that thing? And you could say, hey, just like we put caps on salt, sugar, fat, and food, and we can regulate that, you could put a cap on how much of a hypernormal stimuli you put to that dopamine system, especially for kids. And you could just say, to be in our app store, you have to kind of keep it underneath this measurable level. I don't mean for everyone. There's ways you would do that, by the way. But yeah.
But so some people say, and I think I never really talked to Katie about this. But there's some people say we're responsible. We can't blame other people for our lack of attention. Like we are responsible for our attention, and if it goes astray, it's like, well, my partner made me do it, or the phone made me do it.
Well, so we have to screen. There's totally a truth in that. I mean, the human potential movement and much of spirituality is about taking responsibility for as much as possible of our experience, our attention, our suffering. Just like, oh, I noticed that my attention is going there. Once I notice that, can I come back to something else? And there's a real truth there. But I think what it masks that's invisible is the asymmetry of power. When my attention with my partner, romantic partner or something, causes me to be stressed out, she wasn't a $1 trillion supercomputer who calculated the perfect thing to say to piss me off. So the difference is the asymmetry in how much power technology has to figure out exactly what will light up your nervous system. Which, I mean, TikTok, by the way, is like the perfect example of this, because that specific machine is just a $1 trillion supercomputer pointed at your nervous system and your kids, and just how do I light up that nervous system?
And the default is the algorithm.
The default is the
algorithm. It doesn't even, you don't even care how much you follow or who you follow. They know exactly everything.
They know exactly everything. One thing that was pointed out to me recently, we've made this metaphor for a long time that your phone is a slot machine, the infinite feed is a slot machine, Tinder, swiping, dating is a slot machine. But one of the things that's true in casinos, I don't know if you know this, they hide the clocks. The clocks, they try to hide them. They don't want you to know like what time it is. And I didn't know this, but if you use use TikTok on an iPhone that doesn't have the notch, it's got a flat top, they actually hide the clock.
Wow.
And I think that just really cements it. Like they know exactly what they're doing. And it's just important to say, so let me give you one last maybe hopeful example, even though I come from a different corner of the universe. China is actively regulating their tech ecosystem. It's almost like Xi Jinping saw the social dilemma, because they have...
which could have been possible.
It's quite possible that did happen. And there's been so I'm not praising China when I say this. You can always view what they're doing as totalitarian control over their population, et cetera. But let's for one brief moment take a good faith view of why would they do some of the things they're doing. So if you're under 14 years old, you can only do video games on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for 1 hour. The apps just black out if you're not in that period. For TikTok, you can only use it for 40 minutes a day, every day. If you're under 14 and you use TikTok in China, when you swipe, they have featured museum exhibits, science experiments you can do at home. And because they realize that we're sort of allowing this for-profit model to turn the entire next generation into influencers who don't know anything. And they're...
No, I can't imagine that happening.
And I honestly, I think of this as kind of the reverse opium history. Like the history of opium and the Great Humiliation. They kind of feel like they fell behind because there was opium that was just abundantly available in their society. This is kind of the reverse. Like we're happy to just opiate ourselves. And meanwhile, they're taking all these actions. A couple other ones. On the teen mental health side, they have opening hours and closing hours. One of the problems, parents give kids bad advice, and Frances Haugen talked about this. Parents often tell their kids, just don't use Instagram. Just don't use it. I don't understand. Just put a time limit. Just don't use it. What they don't understand is that that's like saying to us, don't use text messaging, because it's your means of social participation. So Instagram has colonized the meaning of like a teenager who's in their social group. Their primary chat function will be in Instagram with their friends. So if you say don't use Instagram, the parent's thinking the feed.
Right.
They're missing that it's actually the core of social participation.
Yeah.
So, and what that means is that there's always that like social obligation if I have to get back to that friend, or oh, they commented on my other thing, and that just extends into the bedtime. Like, it just extends forever. Yeah. So China has opening hours and closing hours at 10 p.m. It's lights out. And all of the social media apps just like are gone at 10 p.m. and they go back online after 6 in the morning. Wow. And even though it's like, oh, but that's, it is not libertarian. Right. We need our freedoms and they shouldn't tell me what to do. Right. Like, I think that they're probably, their kids are doing a lot better mental health wise than ours. And I didn't realize this, that China has one time zone for the entire country. So 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. is actually synced for everybody in the country, as opposed to there's a staggered thing.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Cool. Yeah. We have time for a few questions. If you can get to them very quickly, we really, really appreciate it.
Anna Choi from Seattle, what has Center for Humane Technology still on Facebook? Because I know there's a good reason for that.
Why are we still on Facebook?
Yes.
Oh, I think we actually wrote a Medium article about it, and I don't have it fresh in my mind. The easy critique, obviously, is if we're critical of social media, why should we be participating? Which is what I hear kind of behind maybe the question, not from you specifically, but just that critique could appear. One of the fundamental problems is that they have colonized, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, have colonized the means of reaching people. So if the small businesses of the world said, oh my God, I totally agree with you, I don't want to participate in this, but their only way to reach their customers is through Facebook and Instagram, they don't really have another choice. And that's kind of one of the problems that we're all kind of in. So we try to use it in a very conscious way. We do it pretty minimally, and we'd love to hear, is there more behind that question? Or?
Yes, and just what can we do as far as you're doing the course, and so that'll be for the next generation and for people educating, but from a macro level, if we start living into those wisdom tenets, what do you see as the first step that
people can do? Users
Yeah.
can do. Well, I mean, I think it's a great question. There's the easy stuff like turn off all notifications, delete the social media apps from your mobile phone, try to use it only on desktop. If you are forced, if you can get off them, like get off them. Most people feel like there's something that fundamentally is entwined with their life and they can't. So if you have to, try to use it just on desktop. I mentioned turn off all notifications, use the Apple screen time features. There's these kinds of things. I mean, I think it's also recognizing what are the deeper fuel sources that have us feel less likely that we need to go there. We interviewed Johan Hari, who's a writer on addiction, who says that the answer to addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And if upstream from us falling into all these traps, if you have people doing things like this, like you're all really engaged right now. When you're doing things that are engaged or you're talking to each other, you don't feel the need to check your phone all the time. And the problem of COVID, obviously, is it robbed us of a lot of those places that were upstream from the downstream addiction. And so I think we need to help rebuild that social fabric and spend more time with each other.
So by not being on it, those tenets will emerge, is the theory.
Oh, well, those tenets are hopefully for the technologists who are building the next generation of technology.
So that's all we can do. Okay.
I mean, we're all, it's this.
Done.
You're welcome to do more, but that's a good place to start.
We'd love to hear ideas on more people can do. There's many people who are working on just the usage side, but yeah, we'd love to hear your question.
Tristan, thank you for your clarity and also your sense of hope. Like really this complexity gap, the paradigm shift. My name's Caitlin Krause, and I founded an XR studio for optimizing well-being through wonder and awe called MindWise. And I also teach, at Stanford, I teach a course called Digital Wellbeing by Design. Awesome. And it's creating healthy relationships with technology. So the students and I talk about the relationship that you have with tech is like with the device, like Soren, you were talking about your feelings toward your phone, but it's also a human-to-human relationship mediated by tech. Mm-hmm. So, and we use a lot of your work and your resources. So,
awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I'm really curious right now because what I've found through my research and working with a bunch of different populations is that the addictive nature also couples with an attachment to identity and maybe promoting yourself. So if you see everybody as an influencer, then you become more addicted to this idea of needing to showcase constantly. So we've been experimenting with things like avatars and looser attachment to one identity, and then states of storytelling and flow. So I'm just curious if any of your research, because a lot of this is about, you know, devices and turn it off and sabbaticals, but what about using digital and using those spaces? You know, I'm just curious what you think about identity and ego and avatars.
I love that question. Thank you. It's already the case. I mean, so much of spiritual work is de-identification in the first place, right? So it's actually doing the identity level. I am not my thoughts. I am not the avatar that I think I am. And I would say that social media found a strategy in the race to the bottom of the brainstem for attention. There was a moment when they realized instead of getting your attention and doing the red notification lights and the infinite scroll, it would be even better if we kind of parasite you and make you addicted to getting attention from other people. Because when you're addicted to getting attention from other people, like there was a time, people forget, 10 years ago, we weren't all addicted to getting attention from other people. It's actually hard to remember that now. And that's how fast this changed and how deeply the terraform is. And when Joseph Gordon-Levitt, the actor, actually gave a talk at TED about this, and he referenced this work, because when you get people addicted to getting attention from other people and it becomes part of their identity, like it's in the interests of this whole attention system to produce the kind of humans who identify with a lifestyle, a career that is about getting attention from other people. That's kind of like late stage extractive identity-based attention economy capitalism. And so, I mean, what I hear you saying is how do we help create just like in spiritual work, you're doing that de-identification work. How do you do that in a digital world online? And obviously, kids play with this. They develop multiple profiles, and they kind of play with one identity over here, and they post different kinds of things over there. I don't have any good answers. I just think that it sounds like your work is really.
We're forming new rituals and new relationships, and I think we're looking for both a state of flow and maybe a new sort of pulse for how we engage.
Yeah.
So you're answering it in the work you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does seem that the spiritual work and the wisdom work is like essential as a society for knowing how to navigate our lives. And we can make changes on the legislative side, we can make changes on the tech side, and we can still be unhappy and miserable.
Right, totally.
And it feels like there's that inner journey that actually needs to be done. And that if we can get people who are on that journey creating the next generation of technologies, we're going to have a much better chance at surviving.
Yeah.
And that as you said, with the metaverse and all the other things that are happening, we're just getting started.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of like potential collapse or potential beautiful expressions, like we're just getting started.
Yeah.
And I've known Tristan for a long time, and I have to say, there's nobody more committed to just figuring this out at all levels. And I'll see him sometimes, it's just like his shoulders are just like, oh, I'm like, how's it going? He's like, oh, I kind of see it a little.
Yeah.
And I just want to have a deep bow to you for just being able to just tackle and hold and have love in your heart and have curiosity.